Have you ever wondered why so many men today feel lost, empty, and disconnected from themselves? In this deep and transformative video, we dive into the silent wound left by the archetype of the absent father, and how that absence shapes a fragile, aggressive, or emotionally empty masculinity. Drawing from Carl Jung's depth psychology, social critique, and existential reflections, we explore how the absence of the father affects the formation of male identity, the desperate search for role models and the cult of false mentors, the impact of toxic masculinity and the psychological shadow of abandonment, and, finally, how you can heal the father within yourself and redefine what it means to be a man today. If you grew up feeling like something was missing, if you carry a pain you've never been able to name, this video is for you. We're not here to accuse. We're here to understand, to heal, to rebuild. Comment below, "I will break the cycle." Show that you are part of a new generation of men. More aware, more present, and emotionally authentic. The father's silence and the son's invisible cry. Have you ever felt like there's an invisible hole inside you? An emptiness without a name, but one that shows up in the decisions you make, in the relationships you sabotage, in the anger that explodes for no reason, or in the apathy that paralyzes you. That emptiness has an origin, and it has a name, the absence of the father. But I'm not just talking about the father who physically abandoned the family. I'm also talking about the emotionally distant father, the father who never looked you in the eye and asked, "Who are you?" We live in a time where masculinity is in crisis. Men grow up not knowing what it means to be a man. They have no role models, no mirrors, only doubts and pressure. And at the center of this collapse lies a deep, dark archetype, the absent father. Carl Jung spoke of archetypes as universal psychic forces that shape our behavior, and the father is one of the most powerful. He represents order, structure, boundaries, and direction. Without him, the inner world becomes chaos. Think about it. How many men today grow up hearing only female voices? Raised by mothers, grandmothers, aunts, teachers, completely immersed in the feminine, but orphaned from the masculine. This is not the women's fault. It's the consequence of a generation of men who gave up being fathers, or who never learned how to be one. And the result? Emotionally broken men, afraid to feel, afraid to take responsibility, afraid to look in the mirror and say, "I have no idea who I am." And maybe that's your case. Maybe you're listening to this now and feeling a mix of anger and relief. Anger because you were left alone in a world that demands you be strong, but never taught you what that means. And relief because finally someone is saying what you've always felt but never knew how to express. Have you ever stopped to think about how many times you tried to prove something you didn't even know what it was? How many times you sought approval from other men, trying to be respected, admired, feared, without realizing that deep down you just wanted to be seen by him, by your father? This video is not just about psychology. It's about identity. It's about the hole left inside you, and how maybe you're repeating it in those around you. And before we go any further, I want to ask you, do you feel that emptiness inside you? Can you see how your father's absence shaped your choices, your personality, even your addictions? So comment below. Let's break the silence. Because the father's silence became the son's trauma. And untreated trauma becomes legacy. The invisible weight, when the boy grows up without a rite of passage. When a boy grows up without a father, or with an emotionally absent father, something subtle, yet devastating happens. He ages, but doesn't mature. Society says, time heals. But in reality, time only deepens what hasn't been healed. For many men, what hasn't been healed is the absence of a rite of passage. In tribal societies, this was clear. The boy was taken away from his mother by a group of older men. He was challenged, confronted. He had to face fear, pain, silence, and nature. And when he returned, he was no longer a boy. He had been initiated. Today, the boy plays video games until he's 30. He takes orders from his mother, his boss, his wife, and never hears from an older man. Now it's up to you. He waits to be validated. He waits for someone to tell him what to do, because no one taught him how to decide. And that's where the cycle begins. Emotionally immature men, running from responsibility, outsourcing blame, searching for validation in sex or work. Validation they should have received as children, not as a treat but as structure. Do you realize how big this problem is? We are raising orphaned men, emotionally illiterate, who know everything about politics, soccer, cryptocurrency, but don't know what they feel, don't know how to handle frustration, don't know how to be alone without going crazy. And that emptiness, which starts as insecurity, often ends in addiction, violence, or depression. Because without a rite of passage, the boy keeps existing inside the man's body. And that boy is afraid to fail, afraid of rejection, afraid of not being enough, afraid, above all, of being unseen by anyone. Do you know someone like this? Or could you be that man? Jung said the unconscious does not forgive. Everything that is not integrated comes back. In dreams, in relationships, in silent self-sabotage. And what is unresolved between father and son repeats between man and the world. Many men today live trying to prove their worth to a figure who's already dead. Or worse, who is still alive but never acknowledged who they really are. And that weighs on the chest, on the back, in behavior, weighs on how we treat our children, our partners, our co-workers. It weighs because no one taught us how to carry it. The question is, if you never had a rite of passage, what are you waiting for? Who's going to tell you it's time? If you feel like you're still searching for that moment of cut, rupture, affirmation, comment below. I was never initiated, because maybe, just maybe, this video is the beginning. The father's shadow, when hate takes the place of love. Few things are as devastating as loving someone who never truly saw you, and even more painful when that someone is your father. When a son seeks, for years, his father's approval, and never receives it, a dangerous tension is born inside him, a mix of love and hate. This conflict doesn't disappear. It hides. And the name Jung gave it was the shadow. The shadow is everything we reject in ourselves. It's resentment, anger, shame, fear, guilt. It's the stifled scream that says, "Why didn't you love me?" And the cruelest part, that scream transforms, turns into sarcasm, aggression, coldness, or often silence. Because we were never taught to confront that emptiness. We were taught to ignore it, to swallow it, to move on. But no one really moves on with a dead father inside their chest. How many men do you know who became everything their father hated, just to provoke him? Or the opposite, how many became exactly like him, even while saying, "I'll never be like him"? That's right. The father's shadow doesn't disappear with distance. It grows. It acts. It shapes us inside while we pretend to have control outside. And you know what's worse? That shadow doesn't just affect the relationship with your father. It seeps into every male relationship, with bosses, brothers, friends, sons. Do you feel challenged by every man who looks you in the eye? Do you feel inferior without knowing why? Do you try to prove your worth even when no one is asking? Maybe it's not the present putting pressure on you. Maybe it's the past, still alive inside you. Jung said that what is not brought to consciousness manifests as destiny. In other words, if you don't face your father inside you, you repeat him, whether as reflection or as opposition. And this is the silent tragedy of many men. They spend their whole lives trying to prove they are better, different, stronger, but never ask themselves, why does this comparison still matter so much? It's because the father never left. He became a shadow, and that shadow only dissolves when it's brought into the light. Now I want you to think, do you feel anger toward your father? Have you acknowledged that pain, or do you still hide it behind jokes, addictions, or distance? Comment below, because as long as you don't name it, the pain rules. Toxic masculinity as unresolved emotional inheritance. The biggest lie told to men is that they have to be tough, because the world is tough. But what no one says is that this toughness many call strength is actually a wall built on pain. Men who were hurt by silence, absence, rejection, learn to survive. And to do that, they build armor. But over time, that armor becomes their identity. The boy who was ignored by his father, when he grows up, doesn't cry. He hardens. He shuts down. He becomes the tough guy, the hard man, the one who can take anything. But inside that armor, there is no strength. There is fear. It's the child still crying, only now in silence. And this is where toxic masculinity is born. Not from the man's essence, but from his desperate attempt not to get hurt again. When a man repeats phrases like, "Real men don't feel pain. Men don't talk about feelings. If someone hits me, I'll kill. She provoked me." He's not showing power. He's screaming for protection. The problem is that over time, this armor traps the man inside himself. He doesn't know how to love without controlling. He doesn't know how to be frustrated without exploding. He doesn't know how to be wrong without blaming others. He inherited a rotten idea of masculinity, a model based on superiority, dominance, and fear of being weak. And what's the most tragic part? This model was often inherited from the very father who rejected him. In other words, the man becomes what he hated the most, without even realizing it. Toxic masculinity isn't born from the man. It's born from the man's unhealed wound. And if this isn't broken, it continues. From father to son. From generation to generation. Emotionally wounded men raising boys who, in the future, will also amputate their sensitivity to be strong. But what is real strength? Strength is crying and moving on. It's admitting mistakes and fixing them. It's being vulnerable without losing direction. The world doesn't need tough men. It needs whole men. And for that, we need to break the inheritance of pain. Now, answer me honestly in the comments. Did you learn to be a man through pain or through example? If you realize that the armor protecting you is also isolating you, comment. I want to learn to be whole. This might be the first step to breaking the cycle. The search for male role models and the worship of false mentors. When a boy grows up without his father's emotional presence, he carries an unanswered question deep inside. What does it mean to be a man? And since he has no answer at home, he goes looking for it outside. But the world doesn't always offer real teachers. Often, it only offers cracked mirrors. And the boy, desperate for guidance, ends up following distorted figures. He thinks he found a mentor, but what he really found was a fragile idol. He gets inspired by the famous athlete who flaunts women, the influencer who talks loud and humiliates others, the coach preaching strength but dismissing empathy, the alpha who says love is weakness, and men have to dominate everything. But what's behind all this? A crowd of lost men, searching in the noise outside for the validation their father's silence never gave them. A father's absence leaves more than just longing. It leaves a hunger for identity, and that hunger can make a man consume anything, even emotional garbage. Jung said it best. When the archetype of the father isn't integrated, the psyche looks to the collective for an image to fill that void. In other words, the unconscious mind searches for a figure to guide it. But without filters, anyone can become a guru, and the result is catastrophic. Men trying to be manly by imitating behaviors that, deep down, hide insecurity. Aggressive, narcissistic, controlling men, admired by other men just as lost as they are. It's the worship of the shadow, the celebration of wounded masculinity. And all of this comes from the absence of a real man who once looked at that boy and said, "You have value, even before you prove it." But what if that man never showed up? The answer is harsh, but necessary. You'll have to become that man. You need to be the mentor you never had, the father you never found, the role model your children or the men around you are waiting for. It's not easy, but it's freeing. It's time to stop following men who shout to hide their wounds, and start learning from those who faced their shadows, and remain whole, even with scars. Now, leave a comment. Who were your male role models? Do you admire men for emotional strength, or for the fear they instill? This conversation is urgent, and maybe it's the most important one in your life. Inner reconciliation, healing the father within and redefining what it means to be a man. We've reached the hardest, and maybe the most freeing point, the moment when a man realizes he needs to stop searching for his father and start healing the father he carries inside himself. Because yes, even if your father abandoned you, even if he ignored you, humiliated you, or was never there, he still lives inside you, not as a presence, but as an absence, as silence, as unprocessed pain, as the echo of a childhood that never felt validated. And this echo shapes decisions, shapes reactions, shapes relationships. Men who became fathers themselves but still secretly hope to be embraced by their own fathers. But there comes a moment when everything changes. And that moment is when you stop asking, "Why did he do this to me?" and start asking, "What do I do now with what he left me?" That's when the wounded boy inside you meets the man you're becoming. And they talk, not to fight, but to rebuild. You are no longer just the product of your father's failures. You can be the beginning of a new story. Healing starts when you recognize that your worth doesn't depend on who loved you or didn't love you. Your worth already exists, because you're here, breathing, choosing, living. The masculinity the world needs today isn't based on power, control, or fear. It's based on presence, on awareness, on emotional responsibility. Being a man isn't about silencing your feelings. It's about learning to express them without being controlled by them. Being a man isn't about defeating others. It's about conquering yourself. It's looking in the mirror and saying, "I forgive myself. I embrace myself. I will do things differently." Didn't have an emotionally present father? Then be an emotionally present father to your son, or to your brother, or to your friend who's breaking inside with no one to talk to. You can be that link. You can be the turning point in your lineage. You can be the man who breaks the cycle. And now, after everything we've talked about, I ask you something simple but powerful. If this video touched you in any way, comment here. I'm going to break the cycle. Not for me, but for yourself. To mark that this conversation planted a seed. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, a friend, a brother, even your dad, share this video right now. Because maybe this video will start their healing journey. And if this content helped you see something new, subscribe to the channel. Here, we talk about masculinity with depth, courage, and truth. No quick fixes, no masks. We talk about the soul. Leave a like so more people can find this content. And hit the bell, because there are still many conversations that need to happen. You're not alone. You were just silent for too long. Now it's time to speak, to heal, to rebuild. The new masculinity begins with men willing to look within. And you've already taken that step.